Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, 1980s, Prey Mantis, Insectoid Aliens. The Mantis Beings in Ufology, Anatomy of an Insectoid Mythos. When people think of UFO abductions, the cultural default is usually the classic gray short, hairless, with large black wraparound eyes, or the human-like Nordics. However, dive deeper into modern abduction lore, and you inevitably run into one of the most unsettling and bizarre entities reported by experiences, the Mantis Beings, or Insectoids. Standing head and shoulders above the grays, literally and hierarchically, these entities occupy a fascinating, eerie niche in ufology. My personal history with the praying mantis entity stretches back further than I realized, though for a long time it sat quietly at the periphery of my awareness. As I recall, I first heard hints of their existence before the new millennium, but at the time I simply wasn't interested. That changed around 2010. While casually researching Draconis out of pure curiosity, an unexpected inner door swung open. My guide introduced a Draconis entity directly into my consciousness platform, my mindscape, the view within the third eye, which I call the window of consciousness. This internal sanctuary has been carefully constructed since 1990, when I first began my meditation practice, followed immediately by a sudden, powerful psychic opening during a trip to Peru in 1991. That pivotal moment blew the doors wide open, marking the true beginning of my lifelong experiences with UFOs, UAPs, and non-human intelligences. During this inner vision around 2010, my guide presented a female Draconis. Her leathery skin was a pale beige, and my intuition measured her height at roughly 9 to 10 feet, towering well above human scale. Unlike the aggressive, volatile nature typically attributed to the towering alpha Draconis, she felt remarkably benevolent and calm. Then, my guide superimposed the upper body of a bright green praying mantis right over the vision. My initial reaction was calm acceptance. Well, it seems mantis beings really do exist somewhere out there in the dimensions. Shortly after that internal transmission, I started hearing about mantis beings cropping up here and there, and by around 2012, they had become a prominent fixture across the internet. By 2015, I made a conscious decision to dig deeper. I wanted to recover memories that my waking mind had locked away, so I booked sessions with a local hypnosis practitioner who specialized in working with experiences. It took 3 exploratory conversations just to build the rapport necessary before entering an actual hypnotic state. But when the day of the session finally arrived, I was in for a staggering surprise. The moment I went under, I was instantly hurtling through what felt like a sci-fi white tunnel corridor lined with doors. Standing directly in front of me was a small gray entity wearing a white doctor's coat, and towering right behind him was a gigantic praying mantis. The sheer psychological weight of their presence left me practically paralyzed. When had I encountered this Dr. Gray and the mantis being? I had absolutely zero conscious memory of it. And then, stepping beyond that towering praying mantis, my mind's eye pierced through to an entirely different dimension, not within the sterile white corridor, but submerged in deep black water or an opaque, viscous liquid. Floating there was a female, octopus-like being. While she maintained a remarkably human-like form, her head was elongated in the characteristic shape of an octopus, with long, undulating limbs to match. She was curled up, drifting in a state of semi-sleep. Yet, I felt no malevolence, aggression, or volatility from her, quite the contrary. Her energy radiated a profound kindness and gentleness, balanced by a sharp, piercing intelligence. She was a rare and striking being, to say the least. Looking at them both, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of connection or relationship existed between this gentle, water-dwelling octopus entity and the towering praying mantis standing guard. As I described the scene aloud to the practitioner, I mentioned a door right in front of me. The practitioner asked me to open it. For a split second, I wondered how, but I forced my focus onto the door and it swung open. That sudden mental jolt instantly snapped my eyes open, pulling me right back out of the hypnotic state. Walking out of that session left me with more questions than answers. I had long suspected that I might have been picked up or abducted by non-human intelligences at some point in my life, but I never in a million years imagined I had crossed paths with a praying mantis. had I been abducted and subjected to the harsh medical procedures or psychological pressures that other experiences so often describe under hypnosis. If my experience mirrored theirs, a protective part of me didn't want to know. Fearing what else might be buried in my subconscious, I made the conscious choice to stop digging and leave the past alone. At least, I tried to. Right as the world plunged into the COVID-19 lockdowns and quarantines, the missing pieces caught up with me. The memories were downloaded straight into my waking awareness through a series of long, intensely draining mental downloads. Suddenly, I wasn't just guessing anymore. I saw fragments of it vividly, rendered in striking high-definition clarity. When investigating the high strangeness of modern UFO abduction lore and contactee accounts, few entities evoke as much visceral awe and psychological disorientation as the Mantis Beings. Diverging sharply from the familiar template of the short, bulbous-headed gray, these towering insectoids occupy a commanding, almost regal position within the hierarchy of anomalous encounters. A deep dive into decades of regression hypnosis transcripts, experiencer testimonies, and contactee logs reveals a remarkably uniform anatomical and psychological profile. The sheer physical scale of Mantis Beings is usually the first detail that strikes an experiencer, often triggering an immediate sense of intimidation or profound insignificance. Witnesses consistently describe them as exceptionally tall, typically ranging between 6 and 7 feet, with numerous accounts stretching past 8 feet in height. Because of their height and slender build, they tower over both human witnesses and any accompanying gray entities in the room, visually reinforcing their role as the primary overseers or directors of the interaction. The physiological structure of the mantis entity is an exercise in biological otherwise, perfectly mirroring the convergent evolutionary traits of terrestrial insects, scaled up to bipedal human proportions. They possess long, exceptionally slender, bipedal bodies. Their limbs, particularly the arms, are elongated and feature distinct joint configurations that fold and bend similarly to a terrestrial praying mantis, often resting in a characteristic praying or arched posture near the chest. Their heads are sharply triangular, tapering down to a narrow chin. Dominated by massive, wraparound, slanted eyes, frequently described as amber, deep green, or obsidian black, these ocular features lack pupils or sclera, often possessing a glossy, faceted, or liquid-like sheen. Their mouths are almost universally described as a thin, horizontal slit or simple seam, lacking lips or teeth. Because of this, their facial expressions remain entirely static, contributing to an eerie, unreadable exterior during high-stress contact scenarios. Human language is entirely absent from interactions with mantis beings, replaced instead by layers of sensory data and high-frequency sound. Witnesses report that mantis beings do not speak aloud. Instead, communication is projected directly into the experiencer's mind as a heavy, overwhelming wave of telepathic data. This mental speech is often described as feeling intensely authoritative, multi-layered, and nearly impossible to block out. When mantis entities communicate among themselves or seemingly calibrate their presence, experiences frequently report hearing an eerie, ambient background soundtrack. This consists of rhythmic clicking sounds, rapid high-frequency trills, and organic chirping reminiscent of insect communication, scaled up to a chilling, conscious level. Perhaps the most complex aspect of the mantis profile is their psychological aura. Unlike the cold, automated, drone-like obedience commonly ascribed to greys, mantis beings project a heavy, palpable consciousness. Experiences routinely describe them as radiating an aura of immense, ancient intelligence, as if witnessing a creature that has observed or guided cosmic epochs, rather than a mere biological organism. Human reactions to their demeanor split down a fascinating psychological fault line. Many experiences find them deeply unsettling, viewing them as authoritarian, cold, and predatory gatekeepers who enforce compliance through sheer mental dominance. Conversely, a significant subset of contactees report feeling an unexpected wave of profound calm, serene wisdom, or clinical neutrality wash over them, interpreting the mantis presence not as hostile, but as transcendent, surgical, and detachedly benevolent. While the archetype of the mantis taps into deep primordial human mythos, its entry into the modern lexicon of ufology did not happen overnight. The evolution of the insectoid entity traces a fascinating trajectory from ancient symbolism to hidden historical anomalies, finally exploding into public consciousness during the peak of the late negative 20th century abduction phenomenon. A deep dive into the historical timeline reveals how these towering entities transitioned from the shadows of folklore into front-page UFO lore. Long before radar operators tracked anomalous craft or experiences sat down for hypnotic regression, the visual and spiritual motif of the giant mantis was already etched into human culture. In certain African traditions, most notably among the Khoisan peoples of southern Africa, the praying mantis holds a revered quasi-divine status. Known as Kagjan, this trickster creator figure occupies a central place in cosmology, bridging the physical world and the spirit realm. Modern archaeological discoveries, such as the famous Timere rock petroglyphs in Iran, estimated to be thousands of years old, feature a striking rock engraving depicting a six-limbed creature with a triangular head and mantis-like proportions, suggesting that ancient humans recorded encounters with forms they could only categorize through insect anatomy. Curiously, during the foundational, post-war birth of modern ufology, insectoid entities were entirely absent from reported contact logs. In the 1950s and 1960s, the contactee movement, typified by figures like George Adamski, Howard Menger, and George Van Tassel, was dominated by encounters with human-looking extraterrestrials. These beings, frequently dubbed the Space Brothers, were typically described as tall, Nordic, benevolent humans wearing jumpsuits who warned humanity about the dangers of nuclear proliferation. During this era, the notion of non-human, multi-limbed, or insectoid supervisors had not yet entered popular culture or mainstream UFO literature. If abductions or bizarre entity encounters were occurring, they were largely eclipsed by the dominant cultural narrative of friendly or philosophical human space travelers. The emergence late 1980s to 1990s. The hypnotic revolution, the mantis entity as we know it today, truly broke into mainstream UFO awareness during the explosive growth of abduction research in the late 1980s and 1990s. A movement heavily fueled by the widespread adoption of hypnotic regression. Pioneering investigators began uncovering startlingly consistent patterns among trauma survivors and experiences. Dr. John Mack, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Harvard psychiatrist, documented cases of patients who, under deep hypnosis, independently described towering insectoid beings directing complex medical procedures. Simultaneously, researchers like Carla Turner, author of Into the Fringe, and David Jacobs encountered subjects reporting these same mantis-like overseers managing abductee networks. The critical factor that gave credibility to these accounts within the research community was independent convergence, multiple, isolated individuals across different states and backgrounds, with no prior knowledge of each other's claims, were visualizing and describing the exact same physical anatomy, telepathic weight, and hierarchical authority of the mantis beings. As the profile of the mantis entity rose in the 1990s, historical researchers began digging backward into older UFO archives to see if these entities had been present all along, masked by social stigma or misidentified. FO researcher Leonard Stringfield, renowned for investigating military whistleblowers and military crash retrieval accounts, scoured older files from the 1950s and 1960s. He unearthed sporadic buried testimonies such as isolated roadside encounters or military base reports where witnesses described tall, non-human entities with rigid angular movement standing near landed craft. Ultimately, these early accounts remained isolated anomalies. The mantis entity did not enter the broader public lexicon until the tools of psychological regression and the cultural safety of the 1990s UFO subculture allowed experiencers to articulate memories that had previously been locked away or deemed too bizarre to share. When examining the complex taxonomy of UFO abductions and contact phenomena, the mantis beings occupy a tier entirely distinct from the common worker entities. Within the lore generated by decades of experiencer testimonies and hypnotic regression transcripts, they are rarely portrayed as the boots-on-the-ground agents performing routine tasks. Instead, they occupy the highest echelons of command, operating as the intellectual architects and clinical overseers of the phenomenon. A deep dive into the tripartite framework of the mantis role reveals how they function within these high strangeness scenarios. In multi-tiered abduction narratives involving multiple entity types, a strict, almost military-industrial chain of command is frequently described aboard the craft. The small bulbous-eyed greys are almost universally cast in the role of technicians, lab assistants, or medical orderlies, handling the physical transport, physical restraint, and baseline biological collection. Standing physically apart from the immediate action, the towering Mantis beings are stationed as the silent observers or supervisors. Witnesses report that the Greys appear to look to the Mantis entities for authorization or instruction, receiving silent telepathic cues that dictate the next steps of the procedure. They are unequivocally the bosses of the room. When experiencers find themselves subjected to invasive medical procedures or genetic extraction protocols, Mantis beings are routinely placed at the very center of the operation. Because of their rigid, insectoid morphology and completely unreadable static faces, they project an air of absolute detached clinical coldness. There is no sense of malice, but equally, zero empathy, only cold scientific curiosity. Abductees frequently note that while physical immobilization is often achieved via beams, fields, or physical touch from Greys, the psychological paralysis is almost entirely generated by the Mantis. The sheer weight of a Mantis being's mental presence creates a crushing cognitive lockdown, effectively numbing the experiencer's panic while genetic samples, reproductive procedures, or complex hybrid tracking take place. Paradoxically, not all experiencers view Mantis beings through the lens of cold medical terror. A significant subculture of contactees interprets their presence through a more transcendent metaphysical framework. In these alternative accounts, the Mantis entities shed the alien doctor label and are reframed as ancient interdimensional guides, spiritual gatekeepers, or cosmic teachers. Believers in this stream of thought suggest that Mantis beings do not merely hail from physical star systems like Draco or Orion, but exist natively in higher dimensions, specifically the fifth dimension and beyond. From this vantage point, they are believed to monitor human consciousness, track planetary evolutionary shifts, and shepherd humanity through critical spiritual transitions, acting as silent guardians of cosmic order. When the clinical transcripts are closed, the hypnotic regression tapes are archived, and the debate leaves the realm of field investigations. The phenomenon of the Mantis beings forces ufology into a profound philosophical and psychological crossroads. Are these towering insectoids literal visitors from deep space and higher dimensions, or are they the intricate projections of the human brain wrestling with the unknown? A deep dive into this dichotomy reveals the two competing paradigms used to explain the chilling legacy of the praying mantis in modern lore. From the perspective of mainstream science, psychology, and cognitive neurology, the vivid accounts of Mantis beings are not interpreted as objective evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, but rather as extraordinary manifestations of internal human mechanisms. Medical science heavily attributes many classic abduction scenarios, especially those involving looming, terrifying entities in a bedroom setting, to sleep paralysis. During this parasomnia event, the conscious mind wakes up while the body remains trapped in REM-induced muscle atonia. The brain's fear circuits fire wildly, frequently generating hyperrealistic hallucinatory imagery of oppressive figures, shadow people, or monstrous insectoid shapes standing at the foot of the bed. Skeptics point out that human imagination does not operate in a vacuum. Decades of science fiction, pulp magazines, horror cinema such as cinematic insectoid monsters, and comic books have saturated the cultural subconscious. When an individual experiences an anomalous psychological or neurological event, the brain reaches into this pre-existing cultural toolbox to construct a narrative framework, dressing up an abstract terror in familiar, chitinous armor. Particularly in the context of 1980s and 1990s abduction research, the use of deep hypnotic regression is viewed by mainstream psychologists with extreme skepticism. Critics argue that leading questions, clinical suggestion, and the intense desire of a patient to find meaning for an unexplained memory can lead to confabulation where the mind inadvertently weaves false, highly detailed narratives out of vague emotional trauma or ordinary sleep anomalies. Conversely, within the subculture of ufology and experiencer communities, the Mantis entity is embraced as a profound, chilling archetype, precisely because it defies comfortable human categorization. Proponents of the phenomenon argue that if intelligent life evolved independently on another world or in an alternate reality, it would bear zero evolutionary obligation to resemble human anatomy. Anthropomorphic aliens in early sci-fi were merely a reflection of human vanity. The mantis, with its multifaceted eyes, non-human articulation, and silent clicking, represents the ultimate realization of true biological alienness, a form so fundamentally foreign that it short-circuits human cognitive comfort. What keeps researchers from casually dismissing mantis accounts as mere individual daydreams is the striking consistency of independent convergence. When individuals from wildly different geographic, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds who have never read UFO literature or spoken to other abductees independently describe the exact same 8-foot-tall frame, triangular head, telepathic weight, and hierarchical oversight under hypnosis, ufologists argue that something objective is bleeding through the noise. Ultimately, whether interpreted as literal interdimensional overseers or as profound archetypes of the collective unconscious, the praying mantis serves as a haunting psychological mirror. They remind us that the universe is vast, strange, and entirely indifferent to human design, waiting quietly in the dark with multifaceted eyes, watching us try to make sense of the unknown. Praying mantis aliens, often called mantis or insectoid aliens, are among the more enigmatic and unsettling types of extraterrestrial beings reported by abductees. These beings are typically described as tall, insect-like creatures resembling praying mantises with some unique characteristics and behaviors. Description and characteristics. Mantis aliens are typically reported to be around 6 to 7 feet tall, with a distinct insect-like appearance. They have long, slender limbs, large eyes, and a mantis-like head. Their skin is often said to be green or brown. They communicate telepathically with humans, frequently using a language of clicks and clacks when communicating among themselves, encounters, and behavior. Many reports of mantis alien encounters involve abductions where the beings perform medical procedures on the abductees. These procedures often include examinations and genetic sampling. Some abductees describe these experiences as frightening and invasive, while others report receiving insights or messages about human consciousness and the future of the Earth. There are claims that the mantis aliens are involved in a hybridization program, using human DNA to create new species. This program consists of creating hybrids that combine human and mantis characteristics. Some abductees report encounters with these hybrids, describing them as tall, humanoid beings with insect-like features. The behavior of mantis aliens is often reported as dual. Some encounters are described as positive or enlightening, with the mantis beings providing educational experiences or spiritual insights. However, other encounters are described as harsh and controlling, with the mantis aliens seen as using humans for their purposes, such as genetic experiments or as a resource. The motivations of the mantis aliens remain primarily speculative. Some theories suggest that they are interested in human genetics and are conducting experiments to understand or utilize human DNA. Others believe that the mantis aliens see Earth and its inhabitants as a resource to be managed or controlled. Despite the varied nature of the encounters, a common theme is the mantis aliens' advanced technology and their ability to manipulate human perception and emotions during interactions. The praying mantis aliens are mysterious and complex in UFO lore, with various reported behaviors and motivations. Their involvement in genetic experiments and their dual nature in encounters make them a particularly intriguing subject for researchers and enthusiasts alike. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archived Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.